Welcome. This is an opportunity to think into Montessori literacy. I'd like to introduce you to the team at Public Montessori in Action.
Hello, I'm Teresa.
Hi, I'm Allison Jones.
And I'm Elizabeth Slade. Thanks for joining us. Our mission at Public Montessori in Action is to ensure fully implemented Montessori education for children, families, and educators of the global majority. We are an organization that is committed to holding both the diversity and strong Montessori vision in our own organization, elevating all voices and allowing professionals from diverse backgrounds to pursue passion projects. And this is a Public Montessori in Action opportunity to think into literacy together in order to build resilient schools for human flourishing. We always open with this quotation from Dr. Montessori. This is education understood as a help to life, an education from birth which feeds a peaceful revolution and unites all in a common aim, attracting them as to a single center. Montessori literacy is something we are all grappling with wherever our Montessori school is. And this is our opportunity to feed a peaceful revolution, to come together in a common aim and bring ourselves around a single center of what is Montessori literacy. So we're going to start by getting onto the same page. When we think and talk about literacy, what do we mean? So we're going to begin by thinking about the two paths that lead to the stream of knowledge, literacy in its biggest picture. So 50 years ago, someone named Muriel Dwyer named the two ways that people learn to read, the mechanical path and the interpretive path. And her distinction has since been confirmed by cognitive neuroscience today. In this booklet, Dwyer offers a systematic approach to reading, maps to National Reading Panel and literacy instructions help us understand that literacy instruction must be sequenced. So this journal, old NAMTA journal, is available, and we will also post the link to it, which you can find on our website. So thinking about these two paths, what is in the mechanical path? When we are rowing our canoe down the mechanical path, what do we find? Well, it focuses on word recognition and the ability to decode. The interpretive path, however, when we're going down the other path, focuses on text comprehension. So one of the things that we'll be talking about when we get to the interpretive path is the idea that you can't actually teach comprehension. You can't teach a child to comprehend. You can only give them access to knowledge that allows them to understand and comprehend. So thinking more about our Montessori environments and the materials and activities and opportunities that they hold in our prepared environment, they're there to develop skills for both mechanical and in the interpretive path. So this graphic here highlights many of the materials that we see in the primary and elementary environments. And when we look at this cycle, it's important to note that materials that lead to reading comprehension and literacy differs from first plane, second plane, and even third plane. While we have placed them in a certain order, the order does differ. So at the first plane of development, we see these different skills can be isolated. So we have a certain sequence that we go through them. We begin with spoken language, we move into writing, and eventually into reading. Whereas at the second plane, we begin to see how they merge. And we support all of them happening at this almost in a simultaneous way. At the third plane, there's an assumption that the early skills for literacy and reading comprehension have already been built, and there's more of a focus on developing further vocabulary and comprehension and fluency. There's an integration that happens between these two paths. So now Teresa is going to talk to us about the mechanical path.
Yes, so when thinking about the two Montessori pathways,
the mechanical path and the interpretive path. The mechanical path, we can think about it as a way, another way to think about it is looking at it like decoding. So decoding is the ability to apply your knowledge of letter-sound relationships, including knowledge of letter patterns, to correctly pronounce written words. And understanding these relationships will give children the ability to recognize familiar words quickly and to figure out words they haven't seen before. So although children may sometimes figure out some of these relationships on their own, many children benefit from explicit instruction in this area. So in order to gain the skill of decoding, the children need both phonological and phonemic awareness, as well as phonics, which is one approach to reading instruction that teaches students the principles of letter-sound relationships, how to sound out words, and also recognizing when there are exceptions to those principles. And so within the Montessori mechanical path, we can think of it as being comprised of 5 different pieces, okay? So the first one is oral language. So the mechanical path begins before we begin with any of the Montessori materials. So we begin with spoken language in a Montessori classroom, where the children are developing the foundational skills based on purely listening and speaking. The second component is that the mechanical path is also systematic. So we need a specific approach. So in this case, we're using a Montessori approach, but within our approach, there might be different systems of reading instruction that we may choose to offer within our classrooms. And the third component is that it is sequential. So we will follow specific discrete steps in helping children gain the different skills necessary for them to develop the skill of decoding. The mechanical path is also calibrated. So we will calibrate whatever system we use within the level and across levels. So calibration, it helps the teachers know where their students are on the continuum. It aids the seamless transition from one level to the next, and it can help identify any holes in instruction and possibly any learning differences. And lastly, the mechanical path is also explicit. So our reading instruction must be explicit. We need to give one-on-one instruction to all children to ensure that they are acquiring each skill. So in the Montessori classroom, like one of the major foundational things that happens is the rich oral language work that is in the primary curriculum. So children, like at the very beginning, they need to be hearing sentences and words and sounds, and this is done through so many primary Montessori lessons, like having true stories be told in the classroom, having poetry be read, having conversations like by a picture. And so it's really embedded within the prepared primary environment. So children need to have opportunities to identify sounds alone and within words, to take words apart, to put them together. So this is seen in like the games we play, songs that are sung, again, like the poetry that it gets introduced. Like this is all the foundation for the children's literacy work. And so Montessori also developed explicit phonics instruction in the mechanical path. However, Montessori's pathway to reading was actually developed in Italian. And Italian is a phonetic language, and English is also a phonetic language, but however, it is multi-mapped by taking words from a multitude of different languages. So English is a little bit more complicated than Italian. So for example, like the word bambino in Italian has all the sound symbols that make up the word, which make it a little simpler. Whereas take the word child. And so the word child does not have all the sound symbols. And so we have additional letter sounds and rules in the English language, which have many exceptions. And this, of course, increases the complexity of phonics instruction. And so to address this added complexity towards phonics instruction, there were materials that were created to support learning to read in English. And so one way is a Dwyer system, but while that is a very prevalent way, that is not the only system that is available for us to use. So in the Montessori pathway, and down the mechanical path, we also have the pink, blue, and green series materials that many classroom teachers have adopted. There are also the Wasika rainbow boxes. The Dwyer approach offers a general approach to phonics instruction, but however, there is no explicit sequence. So these other approaches offer a clear sequence of how to introduce the different letter sounds. And so once we have the system that we will use for instruction, then we need to identify a shared order of sound to symbol introduction. So with the Wasika and the pink, blue, and green series, they have sequenced through the materials. The Dwyer system does not have an explicit sequence. However, a specific sequence can be developed depending on the way to, the methodical way that the content is presented to the children. So the importance of a systematic and sequenced approach to decoding is supported by the National Reading Panel, who conducted that the research literature provides solid evidence that phonics instruction produces significant benefits for children from kindergarten all the way through 6th grade, and for children having difficulty learning to read. So the greatest improvements were seen from systematic phonics instruction. And this type of phonics instruction consists of teaching a planned sequence of phonics elements. So whichever mechanical path materials or system that you choose, the idea is like you should try to stick with them. And because being consistent with the materials and following the outline order and calibrating the materials within the levels and across level, this allows for a whole school shared understanding and equity in our approach towards literacy within all the classrooms. So class calibration helps with transition and assessment and grouping, and it helps like from a school-wide level to identify like holes in like wherever your reading instruction is happening at. So when we are consistent in our approach, the children are also oriented to the materials. There is a consistency in how they work with the materials, which allows for repetition. So this continual repetition of spiraling skills helps the children to remember. So we can think back to the quote, what the hand does, the mind remembers. And another important step in the mechanical path is that we need to be targeted in our instruction with the students. So this is a direct one-on-one instruction with letter sound recognition and daily reading with the children. So outside of explicit instruction, we must make sure that we offer opportunities for children to practice independently through the various activities that are available through the materials. And so in doing so, we need to be choosing decodable text for benchmarking. We need to be looking for a series of books that introduces skills systematically. They should be repetitive, and it's really important that they should also be building content knowledge, and also that the books are diverse, right? And that it consists of individuals from all different walks of life. So children should leave primary reading with the systematic approach utilized at primary, there is a greater likelihood of this occurring. And so with our explicit instruction, we need to make sure to track our students' progress at all levels. So here you can see an example of like how to track, like how to track when children are mastering their various sounds. So our tracking simple, as you can see, it must be simple, manageable, and sustainable. So it doesn't exactly have to look specifically like this, but you should keep in mind that those three things when designing, like how to track your students. And it's important to have these tracking systems because these tools also help with having transitions that are seamless. So with a calibrated system, the transition from one level to the next becomes much more simplified. And so the mechanical path and what we have in our Montessori approach brings us partially to our end goal of reading comprehension. And so Dwyer mentioned that, Dwyer did mention the mechanical path and also the interpretive path. And we know now that learning to decode does not automatically equate to reading comprehension, and that decoding is only half of the equation. So in spite of its importance in the world of reading research, many practicing educators do not know about the simple view of reading. And it is a formula. So the simple view of reading is a formula demonstrating the widely accepted view that reading has two basic components, which is word recognition or decoding and language comprehension. The simple view formula has been supported and validated by a number of research studies. Understanding the formula will help educators with assessing reading weaknesses and providing appropriate instruction. And so we can also provide the link to more information. All right.
So now a short quotation by Dr. Montessori from The Discovery of the Child. A teacher must therefore be well acquainted with the material and keep it constantly before her. They must acquire a precise knowledge of the techniques that have been experimentally determined for the presentation of the material and for dealing with the child so that they are effectively guided. All this constitutes a major part of preparation of a teacher. Now, Allison is going to take us into the interpretive path.
Wonderful. So thinking back to the two paths, Dwyer's formulation for decoding and reading comprehension, we're now going to talk about the interpretive path. A note that we mentioned earlier is that we cannot teach children comprehension. We can just give them access to the knowledge that allows them to comprehend. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Current research into reading highlights the importance of both decoding and language comprehension. The simple view of reading, which Teresa talked about a second ago, was proposed by Goff and Tuntmer in 1986. And it's a formula for demonstrating that reading has two basic components. This formulation as a multiplication problem shows that both the multiplicand and multiplier need to be above 0 for any comprehension to appear. If students cannot decode or cannot comprehend, then reading comprehension will also be 0. Many people represent this as an equation, D times LC equals RC. Decoding times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. We already talked about decoding, so now we're going to delve into language comprehension and the result, reading comprehension. Another model for this is Scarborough's rope, which was conceptualized by Dr. Hollis Scarborough, a member of the International Dyslexia Association. I appreciate how this weaves together the mechanical path and the interpretive path to form skilled reading. It also clearly highlights the components of language comprehension, background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. This gives us a definition of reading comprehension or skilled reading, fluent execution and coordination of word recognition and text comprehension, or in other words, putting it all together. So our question is, what does all of this look like in a Montessori classroom? Back to our slide on the interpretive path. Today, we're going to talk about how content knowledge, vocabulary, and fluency all lead to language comprehension. Let's start with vocabulary. In my opinion, vocabulary is Montessori's strong suit as long as we do our preparation of the adult so that we are continually using and reinforcing it. The 3-period lesson is, in my opinion, one of the strongest elements of Montessori practice for learning new vocabulary. And we have a Montessori ethos of using exact and scientific terminology for all things. I invite you to show me another pedagogy where many 4-year-olds know what a quatrefoil is, and lower elementary students can tell you that a line is a point extended forever in both directions. And here on this slide, you can see some examples of that exact and scientific vocabulary that's woven into all of our lessons. For fluency, there are 2 types. One is traditional fluency, being able to decode fairly quickly. This is often measured in words per minute. The other type of fluency is more difficult to measure. It's all about fluency with ideas, concepts, and prior knowledge. It's the ability to make connections between ideas, to build mental models, and to retrieve information when needed. Both can be built into Montessori classrooms, but how that happens is very dependent on the age of the student. And the last portion of the interpretive path, content knowledge, this will be the bulk of our discussion today. We, in our classrooms, develop content knowledge through conversation, delving into the cosmic curriculum, and through content-rich read-alouds. And you'll see, we like to think of this as C to the 3rd power, the core of our shared knowledge. You see, 3 C's. We have to have fun somewhere. This starts in, this content knowledge development, as Teresa highlighted, starts in primary with oral language activities. It's through oral language, children's ability to talk about things, construct their ideas, communicate their ideas, ask and answer questions, play with and manipulate language, and learn through stories that the foundation for all their future work is laid. Through the conversations they have, they learn about their concrete world and build a strong base for their future learning. Second plane children build on the work that they did in primary with oral language, with the sensorial curriculum, with the language material, to continue their learning about the world around them. They transition from learning about the world they can see and touch and move to learning about the world they can only imagine. The cosmic curriculum and its introduction to the workings of the world provides endless opportunities for building vocabulary. Through this work, children are learning to categorize, grade, sort, make connections, and then eventually talk about interdependencies, to analyze information, and to dive deep into subjects of interest. Through the cosmic curriculum, children are not only building a model of the universe in their minds, they're learning where they fit into that model and how they can be of service. Standards expect certain content knowledge to be addressed at certain grades, and we should be cognizant of and address those standards, but children following their interests provides a breadth and depth of knowledge that cannot be matched by direct instruction in subject areas. Lastly, we have daily content-rich read-alouds to expose learners to new vocabulary and have rich conversation. And this is one area where we can make sure we're hitting those grade level standards. You know, if there is an area of study on amphibians or some vocabulary, we can look for read-alouds that match those standards to make sure those words are getting into children's experience and leading to further work. These read alouds and all of this work should be connected to children's writing. Children need to learn to write about what they've learned as well, multiple ways of processing. These read alouds are especially important because children's listening comprehension outstrips their reading comprehension until almost age 14. So this chart, which is based on a study by Strict and James in 1984, shows when listening comprehension and reading comprehension become equal. If you look at a 6-year-old, for example, this chart is a little hard to read because there are no numbers on the y-axis, so we're going to use our imaginations. But the 6-year-old can do a little bit, has a small reading comprehension, but when we build in their listening comprehension, they can understand up until this level. For a 2-year-old, they don't have any reading comprehension. Their listening comprehension carries the whole gamut. And then at age 12, I think this is what people miss, is that children's reading comprehension get them to hear, but their listening comprehension is still stronger. So this is telling us that it's really critical that we read aloud to children for quite a while, much through this, through all of the second plane, to make sure they're getting the full benefit of building that content knowledge. So in practice, this means that classroom adults read aloud twice every day with students, once individually or in small groups to hear children read, and once to read content-rich vocabulary to students. Children should be practicing their decoding and their language comprehension, both on a daily basis. So this work with oral language, the cosmic curriculum, and content-rich read-alouds, remember those 3 C's, brings children to a core of shared knowledge. Research shows that for reading comprehension, core knowledge matters more than decoding ability. So this is a study where students were tested with a text about baseball, and they were junior high students. And what they found was that, quote unquote, this is the language of the study, weak readers in junior high who knew a lot about baseball outperformed strong readers who knew little about the game. Another way to think about this is that knowing a lot about the subject made weak readers into strong readers. Here we have a quote that helps us to think about this. Of course, high-stake tests don't contain passages on baseball precisely because that would be unfair to kids who don't follow this sport. But they do contain passages on the founding documents of the United States, on animal ecology, and on space. This means that we as teachers need to interrogate the texts that we're using with our students to make sure that they're relevant, interesting, and can grow children's knowledge of the world. In some school settings, children are reading and writing about why grandmothers are special, or what could happen if everyone brought their pets to school. There's nothing inherently wrong with these topics, but children need a deep and broad foundational knowledge in order to understand the passages that they encounter, both in high-stakes tests and in life. A question to ask before choosing a text is, where does this fit into the cosmic curriculum? This is another study that highlights the impact of knowledge on reading comprehension. So we all know that writers leave out things that they think readers know. They expect us to be able to imagine a doctor's office. They don't explain how people walk downstairs. These are silly examples, but possibly not to someone who's never seen a doctor's office. Any of us who've explicitly tried to teach inference to 1st and 2nd graders understand why background knowledge is important. It's impossible to make inferences, which is a necessary language comprehension skill, without background knowledge. This slide shows how teaching knowledge explicitly improves reading comprehension. The 1st and 2nd graders in this study who received both science and reading intervention grew on average 0.42 almost half a grade more, 0.42 grades more than the control group on the reading subtest of the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, and 0.28 grades more than the control group on the science subtest. So that content knowledge and explicit reading instruction worked together. So now we've talked about decoding, the mechanical path, and we've talked about language comprehension, the interpretive path. These two come together to form their product. Get it? Product, multiplication, little Montessori joke of reading comprehension. But as we said, sadly, you cannot teach reading comprehension. You can, however, create the conditions for it to happen. Which is why we're now going to edit that equation we saw before. Decoding times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. We're adding an M to mean motivation. Montessori highlighted that this in the absorbent mind. She said that the environment must be rich in motives which lend interest to activity and invite the child to conduct his own experiences. Our role as teachers is to prepare the environment and to link children to that environment through their interests to meaningful activities. So that motivation, when children are interested in the topics, that's the gas that drives the car of learning. We, as educators, this is our work of the prepared adult. We get to think about how to build, how to feed that motivation, how to use that motivation to feed children's desire to work both on those technical skills and to take in that content knowledge to build their reading comprehension.
So we come to the close of our time together thinking about Montessori literacy by clearly defining our goal here, which is to offer all learners real work to support their growth and development. So what to do now that you've watched this piece is to think about the plane of development that you're working with. Who are the children before you? What are their characteristics of their developmental plane? And to design real work that address both the mechanical and the interpretive paths, right? And then action changes things. So we have available for you an action plan on our website to build your own action plan with your team. So calibration was one of the important pieces around the mechanical path. Think about doing this not just in isolation, but with your team, even with your whole school, and thinking about what you'll do differently now for the mechanical path and for the interpretive path. And what support do you need in order to reach these goals, right? So that you can take that to your coach or your school leaders and ask for what you need in order to reach this goal, the goal of offering all learners real work to support their growth and development. We also have for you on the website a resource to share that you can click and download and take and share with the people in your school. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to end with some words of Dr. Montessori.
And you will, I'm going to read the first quote, but you'll note that we sometimes, almost all the time, we're working on it, are trying to take out Montessori's gendered language and replace it with gender neutral language. So you'll hear us say they or themselves instead of she, her, or he, him. So our first quote is that we discovered that education is not something which the teacher does, but that it is a natural process which develops spontaneously in the human being.
And the second quote we're going to read is, the adult must give and do what is necessary for the child to act themselves. If they do less than is necessary, the child cannot act meaningfully. And if they do more than is necessary, they impose themselves upon the child, extinguishing creative impulses.
The child is endowed with unknown powers, which can guide us to a radiant future. If what we really want is a new world, then education must take its aim, then education must take as its aim the development of these hidden possibilities. So we have a new collaborative forming called the Literacy Collaborative, and it's a group of interested people like maybe you who want to come together and continue the conversation around Montessori literacy, to share tools and resources and to develop ideas together. And if you're interested in this collaborative, you can contact Teresa at the email address shown. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.